This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for MyEyeDr OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with my eye doctor. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Steve Morris, a former world-class yacht designer and racing team member turned executive coach and leadership strategist. From prepping boats to race around the world to helping CEOs navigate uncertainty, Steve has spent a lifetime studying what makes high-performing teams truly thrive. In this episode, we explore the difference between good teams and great ones, what yacht racing can teach us about business leadership, and how stress, purpose, and neuroplasticity all play a role in team success. We also talk about Steve's farm-based retreat center in Colorado, where teams reconnect with themselves and each other on solid ground. If you're leading a business, building a team, or wondering how to be more intentional with your energy and purpose, this conversation is for you. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please welcome Steve Morris to the show. Welcome, Steve. It is fantastic to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here today.
I'm really excited to talk to you because there are a lot of things that I find very interesting about what it is that you do today and how you got there. And so as we go through the conversation, I think people are just going to learn a whole bunch about themselves, a little bit about yachting, which I think is actually pretty interesting, but also a whole bunch about how to think about themselves as part of a team and being a high performer in that team as well.
Right.
So why don't we start where you are today, and then we'll come back to that here in just a bit. But today you're spending your time helping other people learn how to build, perform, and be part of high-performing teams.
Yes, 100%. So I actually work with like two different client groups, but they intersect and there's overlap. So firstly, I work with entrepreneurial leadership teams. So this is usually teams that are running small to medium-sized businesses, somewhere between 3 million to up to 500 million or so. But it's a group that's coming around the table, right, to be able to set the vision for the business, to show up, to be strategic thinkers in the business. And then I help them with, helping them develop their strategy, but then help them bring it down to the ground and get traction, get the discipline, get the accountability, and then also work together as a healthy, functional team, right? Because this is really the sort of the crux of it all. There's that very common saying out there, culture eats strategy for lunch, and I see that all the time. So we've really got to focus on who that leadership team is being when they're together. And then the intersection is then with the second population group that I work with as those individual entrepreneurs, leaders, professionals who are wanting more for themselves to really be able to figure out, how am I going to level up? What do I need to do? Maybe they've got some feeling that they're not doing not being as effective as they could be in their lives. Maybe there's a bunch of mental, thought patterns and things that they are seeing that aren't serving them, and they'd like to be able to work with those. And then also, what I tend to find is with people who have been running hard, building businesses, and creating amazing things in the world, is at some stage they can sometimes come and get to a point where they're sort of like, why am I doing this exactly? They've kind of lost maybe touch with the original sort of motivating forces and are wanting to come and reconnect back to, their purpose and who they are, and get to a place where they're in more ease and flow in what they're doing in their lives. So, as I said, there's an intersection there because, of course, when I'm working with a leadership team, it's still a group of individuals who are showing up at that strategic planning table together.
And so, as we think about the work that you're doing today, it feels like this is really something that's a calling for you. You've had a lot of experience that kind of brought you to wanting to help people in this regard, but it's not exactly where you started. And so, can you talk a little bit about your early career, which is seemingly very different than where you are today?
Yes, and it is. It's been quite a journey that I've been on, quite a voyage. And so I started my career coming out of college. I'd studied mechanical engineering in college, and my first job was on a professional sailing team. So I was part of a team. I worked for a year and a half to get a boat, an 85-foot racing ketch, ready to go sail around the world. I didn't actually sail around the world myself, but I spent a year and a half like getting the team ready, doing the performance analysis. And, it was all the way from being at a gym at 6 o'clock in the morning, lifting a lot of weight, and things so I could get strong enough and fit enough such that when we went out sailing to test the boat, to do trials and to figure out how to optimize its performance, I was a part of the team doing that. So that was a, very sort of early introduction for me into sort of really what it felt like to be part of a truly high-performing team. Then from that experience, I went into actually designing sailboats. And so this is where my mechanical engineering skills sort of married up with my sailing background. And I actually got to spend many years designing boats that sailed around the world, and won round-the-world yacht races. And so once again, really experiencing what it's like to be on a team where everybody's on the same page, sailing in the same direction, literally. Versus, there were some teams that I participated in that didn't make it, despite having the resources we needed. And at the time, I knew what the highly functional team felt like. I knew what the grind of a dysfunctional team felt like, but I didn't really have the tools or the frameworks to be able to understand like that. I just had this sort of an innate sense like, this team's really great, this team's a grind. Why is that? And that's really has driven my mission and my passion ever since then, is figuring that out, and then having, developed and got some tools to be able to bring those back to leadership teams and businesses, to help them get on the same page, sail in the same direction, and have more fun.
It's interesting to think about teams that are performing functions that are really on life and death, right? Like if you're sailing around the world, depending on that team is something that is helping to make sure everybody makes it around the world safely, right? Mm-hmm. And that comparison is maybe somewhat similar to thinking about people who are in other high stress or high probability of injury or problem type environments. So military teams, rescue teams, those types of teams. And so functioning together in high performance is essential for those teams. How do you see the similarities or differences in those teams where it is a matter of not just whether or not we're going to perform for the quarter, but it is, we got to keep everybody alive? Do you see differences in the way those teams are formed and what those teams functionally look like?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think ultimately, that there are a lot of similarities. We're building a high-performing team. I think there's a bunch of different aspects that are coming up for me right now. I mean, one of them is certainly being sort of very purpose-oriented. In other words, like, being very clear about why it is that we're here. Really developing an intentional sense of our core values and who we are as a team, and kind of like the way, we perform as a team. And then, seeing these sort of the individual's contribution to that team, I think is so critical. And then I think the other aspect of it is sort of having to find sort of who we are as a team. And then it's like training, right? I think the degree that, people really sort of take seriously their needing to be able to work together at the highest levels of performance means that we've got to come back and train. And, so a couple of things come up for me. One is, the Navy SEALs, right? They've got this saying that has stuck with me, which is, you never rise to the level of your, I think the phrase is, you never rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your training. That's why we train hard. James Clear had a very, very similar saying in his book, Atomic Habits, which was, we never rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So it's a very sort of similar idea. And I see this time and again, that teams can, they can state goals, we can set goals, put those things out there. But I think that the real difference is the teams that really level up in terms of the training and the systems that they're putting in place to truly be high performing. I think that makes all the difference.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think if you're trying to put together a group of people and you've got a certain number of tasks or things that you hope to achieve, then understanding the individual contributions of the individuals joining the team are important, but it's also how do you make sure that their individual contributions actually help to forward the group in general. And that is, to me, a little bit more difficult to sometimes understand on the front end, particularly when you're just going out. Maybe you've been given people on the individual team, or you're making the decision to go out and find somebody new to join the team.
Yes, well, really getting the right people in the right seats is what I talk about in the work I do with the entrepreneurial operating system. And this comes from Jim Collins, who wrote about it in Good to Great, many years ago. But he did this analysis where he looked at companies that have significantly outperformed the stock market over a long period of time, not just, flash in the pan, but over over years, decades. What did those companies do? And one of the key things that he really saw was this: we've got to get the right people on the bus and then figure out where to drive the bus, right? And right people are people who fit the culture of the organization. And so, I think if we, when I see my clients, really focus on that and find those people, it really is, it's just an amazing freeing up and, like a force, it's a multiplier, I think, for a high-performing team when everybody on that team is truly showing up to be their best. Versus, I think, probably a lot of us have worked in places where there's been that one person, who's just kind of not with the rest of the team, right? And and unfortunately, I think then, sometimes the overall team performance can then be limited because of, one person in a certain position in that team. So really getting clear, why are we here? What are we doing? And then how do we act, right? Like what are the standards by which we're all going to hold ourselves and hold each other collectively about what it is that we're going to do. You mentioned you've come from a clinician background, and I was at a conference earlier this year. A couple of doctors, orthopedic surgeons, were talking about how they were running their operating room with a truly high-performing team. And it was just very interesting to hear how the system they put in place. And so before surgery starts, they gather everybody around, have a quiet moment, and then they're, whoever the patient is, here's Mrs. Smith here today to have knee surgery because she wants to be able to go play with her grandkids. Right. And I just, and then go around the room. Are we all clear about what the objective is? It's not just doing knee surgery. The objective is for Mrs. Smith to be playing with her grandkids, right? And what's everybody in the team, I'll make sure we're all on the same page about that's the objective, right? And it's, of course, it's taking that inspiring goal, right? We're not just here to get through this surgery. We're here for this inspiring goal that we're going to, get Mrs. Smith back up on her feet again and playing with her grandkids, right? And I think that's creating that inspiring goal, and then having everybody in the team see their place in that goal, right? The want to be a part of that goal. And knowing that as a team, we're going to all level up to be able to get to that objective is a very, very powerful thing.
That is a very, very powerful thing, because not only does it humanize the experience, but everyone has that thing that they want to be able to do. And so you can imagine yourself, and if you were in the position, that thing that you would want to be able to participate in. How hard is it, though, to establish what that North Star is, that aspirational goal for organizations or individuals?
Yeah, I think it can take a lot of work. When I'm working with a leadership team, it takes 2 to 3 sessions for us to really sort of have the discussion, to be able to put some things up on the wall, to be able to come up with that inspiring goal. And then I come back to it with teams every quarter, every 90 days. We get back in the room and look at the vision and say, is this still a good vision? Right? Go around the room. Is everybody still on board with this vision, or do we need to change it? Right? But we really want to make sure that everybody is still signing up for the vision, and it's just something that needs to be looked at and reaffirmed and come back to on a very regular basis. I think when I'm working with individuals, it can go a little deeper. I think there's something about, an individual entrepreneur or leader or professional, as I was sort of talking about before, getting to that sort of point in their life when they're thinking about, like, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing here? What is my vision? Because then I think we start at that deeper level, we start wrestling with what I'll call the judging voice, the head trash, the other things that, can come up inside someone's thought processes about whether or not they're able to achieve the vision. I think collectively as a team, there's more momentum. Like when we have got a group of people, there's some esprit de corps in that everybody's going to help each other. But at an individual level, I think then it really does come down to what's going on between the ears here. How do we see the world, each other, and ourselves? It's fundamental.
Well, that's an interesting topic, though, because I think maybe I'll ask it this way. When you were preparing for sailing around the world, knowing that you're going to be part of this team, can you walk through maybe what the goal was that kept you engaged, because you had to get up early, you had to do these things, and how that helped you fit with the team or not fit with the team, and what the team was really looking for or focused on to be able to be successful?
Yeah. Well, the objective, for the boat was to win a round-the-world yacht race, right? To be able to spend 6 months sailing. The race starts in England, goes all the way down through, the Atlantic, around underneath Cape Horn, across underneath the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, and then back up through the Atlantic, with stops along the way. But nevertheless, it's an epic long race, and so and it's competitive, right? It's a yacht race. There's I think the time probably about a dozen boats in the race. So I think that that was the overarching goal that was motivating everybody, is like, how are we going to get the boat ready to go win this race? And just knowing then, like the physical demands that were going to be required. And that's then, motivating for getting up, going to the gym in the morning. There are lots of other demands too. And when we had to get the sails optimized, the crew functioning, right? All of the maneuvers and things like that had to be practiced and trained on and practiced and honed. And then, just to sort of, as check-in points, there were other sort of smaller races that we would enter into. Or training things like sailing from, I was down in New Zealand, so we were sailing from New Zealand to Australia and doing other races. These were sort of check-in points, right? And so you sort of see how you're doing against the competition.
Yeah.
And they're trying hard too, right? I mean, the competition's doing everything they can to go as fast as possible. So, there's that motivation as well. Everybody's doing their best.
Right, right. And so you moved from sailing and preparing for races to designing. What did you take with you from your practical side, from actually participating and spending the time on these boats to your design?
Well, I think that that was an essential part of being successful as a designer, was to have some practical experience, and that was also an iterative process. In other words, we would design a boat, it would get built, it would get launched, and then we'd go sail on it and do the testing and figuring out, like, is the boat performing the way we've designed, and the types of boats we were designing, and also the types of clients that we were working for, always kept us on our feet. Because I still remember, like we'd put everything that we had creatively into a design, and as the boat would get built and launched, and then the moment it's launched, our client would be saying, "Okay, how do we make this faster?" Right? And I've just done everything I can to make the fastest design, in the first place. But that was the constant challenge, was we're not gonna rest here. We need to keep improving, right? We need to keep trying things and testing other things. And that, the experience then, of course, is sort of like going out sailing, seeing how things work, going back to the design office, and then going into the creative process of how do we come up with some more ideas? How do we test those out? How do we see what's feasible and what's not? And then what might go through to improving the thing that we've already just thought was the fastest thing that we could design.
And that's not unlike a typical enterprise either, is it? It's you're as part of a large group or a large company, you're always looking for ways to iterate and become better, even though what you just did was amazing. What's next is always very important. And so how did you decide, though, that I've now raced, I've now designed, I've worked with these teams, and now I feel like I'm going to leave the design world because I want to be able to work more specifically with people and teams to make them better?
Yes, so it was a very interesting sort of thought process, I guess, going through that journey that you've just described. But I mean, ultimately, I was very sort of curious about how do we get truly amazing teams to be able to go and do amazing things. And as I sort of said before, I didn't really kind of have access or have the tools myself or have access to the tools within that environment. So I made the difficult decision to go out, right, and to be able to go into different environments to learn, to find out different things. And so I went from the yacht design world into doing contracting work for the Navy as a project manager. And there, I mean, that really was, a much larger environment where I was able to, number one, sort of get true project management experience, become professionally certified as a project manager, and to really, see my contribution in helping these much larger groups of people with a lot more at stake, like really, to be able to launch a 1,000-foot long naval ship and get it out to the fleet. That was a lot. And it was a great learning experience for me to be in that sort of environment, to really kind of see all of those parts coming together.
And then as you were working there, you somehow made the transition though and said, I've learned to project manage. So these are building blocks, I kind of think, right? So you have now learned to scale what you were doing before into something larger, and you gain the skill of project managing. But how did that translate into helping executive teams and entrepreneurs and CEOs work on themselves and their teams? Yeah,
it's an interesting sort of thread to look back over my career. I think I've always sort of had that that passion for a business drive within me. Within the yacht design business, I rose to become a leader in that business over many years. When I was working as a government contractor, I wasn't just always focused on my government clients. I was also looking, within the company, and it's like, how does this big corporation work and things. And so I also went and did an executive MBA program right in the middle of my career, because I wanted to learn, within this, as you're talking about, scaling up into this bigger picture. But then I think, I did that for 10 years. It was a long period of time. But ultimately, I'd been assigned to a project towards the end of my time there that I really just sort of saw that I didn't think that my talents or what I wanted to do in the world were being sort of really very well used on that particular project. And I was kind of curious about, I really loved the sort of the entrepreneurial world. Because there's one thing about the government world that it was a great learning environment, but it's also pretty much a very sort of risk averse environment. There's layers upon layers upon layers. So I sort of wanted to get back to that, more inspiring environment when I was designing sailboats. I mean, of course, this is a very risky environment. If we design the boat, too heavy with too many safety factors, and the crew gets upset at us because the boat's weighs too much.
Yeah.
If we don't design it with enough safety factors and something breaks, the crew gets angry with us because the thing broke. So we're sort of got to, thread the needle in there. And I think, and this comes back to sort of something that jogged from what you were saying before, is sort of like being in this environment where you have to make, weighty, important decisions, but with incomplete information, was something that I think I did reasonably well at that, and I sort of liked being in that kind of environment. And I think that's, there's so much of entrepreneurship with that, right? We're trying to build the business. We've got products or services we're delivering into a certain market, but then there's, things happen, right? And particularly right now, there's a lot of change happening in the business world, and my clients are trying to figure out how to navigate that, right? They're trying to figure out, how do we make decisions, and we have incomplete information, or the situation seems to be changing on a weekly basis, and that's making it very difficult to sort of look forward. So anyway, long story, I was sort of really wanting to get back to my entrepreneurial roots. So I decided, to make the decision to leave the government world, and I have started my own business, which I've been pretty much doing for the last 10 years. It's within that self, it's had a number of different iterations. But being an engineer, loving business, loving leadership, I wanted to find a way to sort of work with business leadership teams and individuals in a more creative way. I love helping people be able to figure out, if they've got an idea or a dream, like how do they bring that into the real world, into the actual tangible world. Mm-hmm. So that's been what's been motivating me for quite a while now.
That's amazing. And so from where you are today, not only are you working directly with individuals and teams, but I think you've also started to create a space for them to be able to come and work together outside of their normal space. Is that right?
Yes. And as part of my passion that I'm working on these days, so I live on a farm in Colorado, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And we're creating this whole farm environment as a place for busy entrepreneurial leadership teams to just come and get out of the whirlwind and just kind of slow it down, get reconnected with each, themselves, with each other on the team, and to get grounded, literally, get on the ground. And so I'm creating an environment, where that's going to happen. And because what I really sort of see is, when people they're in the whirlwind of the business and in what we call it being in the business, right? All of the day-to-day stuff, it's very difficult to kind of get their head up and to take a step back, get a little bit of perspective about where are we and where should we be going. And I really want to create an environment around that. And, along the way, to be able to feed people a healthy farm-to-table lunch. I mean, this sort of brings in a lot of very personal passions of mine around, being healthy. As a human being is one thing. I mean, there's this concept called the Centenarian Olympics, which was, I think, coined by Dr. Peter Attia. But the concept sort of is, imagine you're 100 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And what do you want to do when you're 100? Do you want to be able to lean down and pick up your 3-year-old great-great-grandchild as they come barreling into your shins and pick them up? Do you want to still be able to put your bag in the overhead, bin on the airplane as you're traveling around the world? Do you want to be able to run for a train and catch it in Italy and these sorts of things, right? I mean, it's just about creating that vision, right, and then bringing it back to, because no one's managed to beat the system yet. There is an inevitable decline that we all go through, but you can adjust the slope of the decline, and you can also set the starting point of the decline higher.
Yeah.
Through taking care of yourself, right? And it all dovetails together for me, because I see when I'm working with leadership teams, like people who are managing their energy and optimizing it are showing up better at the leadership team table, right? People who are managing their mental state of mind and how they see the world make better decisions as leaders of organizations. People who are getting enough sleep. It's a basic thing, right? But if you're not getting enough sleep, then you're not going to be in the best position to be making the decisions you need to make in the business. And these things. And so it all sort of ties together for me is, the personal side of looking after yourself as a leader helps you show up as a better leader in an organization.
It's that whole concept of mental fitness, right? Like as you, all the things that you have to do both physically, emotionally, and mentally to make sure that the ducks are in a row, so you can perform and make the best possible decisions. And a lot of people, I think, discount some of the physical things that you should do in order to keep the body healthy. I think we're learning more and more about dementia as an example, right? And that hearing plays a role in the development of dementia. And some of the research is pointing to brains that are occupied with trying to compensate for other types of physical issues lose their ability to keep the memory and the other function intact, right? And so it's important for people to be able to hear, and so having hearing assessments and hearing aids help out so that they don't have the brain trying to compensate for the lack of hearing and they don't move towards dementia. And so I think a lot of what you just mentioned are things that are not necessarily thought of top level, but when you start to dig down lower, you realize how important these pieces are, right? And it is when you start to look at people and teams that are more successful, it's probably a correlation to making sure that some of these other things are actually functioning the way they should be too.
Yes, yeah, no, it's hugely important. I think I'm a big believer in this. We are natural organisms, and natural organisms are actually very efficient. In other words, if you don't use some particular capacity or capability that you have, then nature's going to not emphasize that, right? I mean, if you just sit on the couch and watch TV all the time, then your natural system's going to optimize to that state. So we need to keep, in my view, maximizing the sort of like what I call like the window of tolerance, the envelope of your capacity and capabilities in the world. And so physically, and I'm seeing this as I get older, right? It's sort of like doing things like yoga and stretching, because sometimes the physical act of like picking something up off the floor, this ends up being a tenuous thing, right? If you don't lean down and pick stuff up off the floor all the time. To your point about hearing, right? I mean, if we don't use the hearing capacity, then the brain part decides, well, we don't need to expend energy on this. We'll just switch that part of the brain off or whatever.
That's right.
But I see this, when this translates into leadership teams and leaders, the ability to be able to metabolize stress, right? The mental fitness training, like what's going on when something happens at work. Or even in the home life, but when some situation comes up, if you haven't trained for it per se, if you haven't sort of kept your envelope, your window of tolerance wide enough to be able to take on what's happening, you become triggered, right? And then, the amygdala takes over, fight, flight, fear, freeze, those sorts of things. Well, you're no good as a leader in a business when you're operating out of your amygdala, right? Because you're going to be making, these decisions not out of the, a rational part of your brain. So what do we have to do, right? We have to be able to put ourselves in situations, and, it's hormetic stress situations, right? Where we're sort of deliberately doing something that does stress us so that we can, but in a safe way, right? So that we can keep our window wide, so that when something really does happen at work, we've got it, right? We can stay in that grounded, thinking frontal cortex, switched on, like I've got this, I've got the confidence
Right.
to be able to deal with the situation. And I see this all the time. I work with high-performing entrepreneurs who make a lot of decisions every day, and then they're waking up at 2 a.m. and they're like, did I make the right decision yesterday? Am I the right person to be making these decisions? Do I have what it takes to be able to lead this business? Right? These are just natural things that do, thoughts that come up in people's minds. And I work with my clients to be able to notice these thoughts are happening. And then through this, what do we call a distinction, that you can choose your thoughts, right? Simple, but not easy, right? You can actually choose to reframe how you're seeing things, choose different thoughts. But it's not just, I can't just, wave a magic wand, snap fingers and have somebody think differently. We have to train for that, right? I have to go through, a period of time of noticing and shifting, noticing and shifting, and doing that when you're not stressed and triggered, so that when you do get into a stressful situation, you're like, oh, muscle memory, I've got this. I know how to be able to reframe a thought here.
Yeah, and that speaks to that whole concept of neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rethink or repattern itself based on the new inputs and the directed behavior, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So, if people are interested in learning more about you and farther in this conversation, how do they do that?
Great question. Thank you. So my website is stevemorriscoaching.com. That's a good place to start out. I've got a free course on my website, and it's called Creating Your Morning of Distinction. And as we've sort of been talking about in this conversation, I really sort of see, and I know this for myself, I've got gained so much for myself from starting my day off on the right foot. And, if you're one of these people that sort of wakes up in the morning and then your brain just starts hamster wheeling away the moment the alarm goes off. What about this? And oh my gosh, all of these things, right? It's not the most optimal way to start the day. And so in this course, Creating a Morning of Distinction, I've got 10 different things that people can try.
Oh, wow.
That, can just maybe interrupt the hamster wheeling brain and start doing some more useful things to get your day off on the right foot. And, they're things that I've gained from listening to other podcasts and people, for example. So one of them is getting outside and getting, natural daylight into your eyes. This comes from Andrew Huberman, where he's sort of talking about we've got all these hardwired circuits in our brain, right? And we can switch them on and use them in a beneficial way if we do things like get outside, right? And so, so that course has a bunch of these tools and techniques, if you like, that I have found very useful for myself. I work on with my clients. It's free. So people can sign up and download it and get access to it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, I really think that you've had such a varied experience, but I love how it really all ties together, and the consistency of performance and teams and how the individuals contribute to that team, I think is really amazing. Even when you start to think about it across different industries, and in your case, across different phases of your careers. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And I think this is an interesting subject, one that maybe we've just scratched the surface on a little bit. And so there may be pieces that we have to come back to you and talk about a little bit more in depth as people comment or ask questions about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. I've really appreciated it. And yes, I can talk about this stuff for hours. It's an endless passion for me. So thank you very much.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show because we're working really hard to bring you great content and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff. So go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.